From its inception, Intrepid has proclaimed Ashes to be a PvX game and has held true to this idea. Their original design philosophy has not changed much over the years, and it has garnered significant attention in the MMO community. The company has reiterated their stance time and time again, from interviews to live streams, podcasts, and more, but up until recently, no one really knew what this meant. Sure, PvX to most of us in the MMO space, we understand what this means. It's a mixture of two primary playstyles, PvE and PvP. But to get down to the nitty-gritty, what is the balance of this mixture? What percentage of the game will be PvP and what percentage of the game will be PvE? What systems will be in play to support PvP and vice versa for PvE? One thing to take note of, the fluctuating definition of PvX that has been prevalent around the MMO industry lately. So much so that the description itself is unclear and at this point has almost become a buzzword meant to describe a game that is different from all the rest. But is it? Let's take, for example, World of Warcraft. What kind of game is it? Back in 2004, it was called an MMORPG. And for several years since then, everyone who played an MMO knew exactly what that meant. But MMORPG just doesn't mean today what it meant back then. To the point that we need to use new descriptors just to be able to explain to someone what type of game, whatever game we're talking about these days, it really is. World of Warcraft is a PvX game. For PvP systems, it has many battlegrounds of different sizes, objectives, locations. It has arenas for competitive PvP that support anywhere from 2v2 to 5v5 fights. It has rewards that can be obtained specifically by participating in PvP. It has open world PvP where a max level character could travel to a low level zone and gank a noob, or there could be community driven world PvP events that vary from server to server. If you are in the know, remember South Shore versus Tarnmill. On the PvE side, the content was just as engaging. From level 10 all the way up to max level, there's a plethora of dungeons to support group PvE engagement. Some that were short and sweet, some that were so long they took hours to complete, and both felt epic. Teamwork against monsters and baddies was the objective, and that sweet loot was the goal. Once you made your way to endgame content and were geared enough, you could partake in raids. Large group content anywhere from 10 to 40 people requiring significant cooperation and coordination to bring down some of the toughest bosses in the game and for epic rewards. There is even scaling where if you wanted to make the dungeons or raids more significant challenge for better rewards, you can. Did I also mention world bosses? Non-instance bosses that existed out in the open world, not unlike a raid that required a large group to defeat. But wait! You could be attacked by the opposing faction in the midst of your attempt, potentially losing that loot for another team. Now, this video is not an advertisement for World of Warcraft. It's an Ashes of Creation video, but does any of this sound familiar? Also, I hate to break it to the WoW enjoyers out there, but World of Warcraft was not and is not the only game that has had these features. But again, we call WoW an MMORPG, so what changed? Is it us, the player base, the core audience, or is it the gaming industry? Whatever the source of this shift in nomenclature, Steven seems to have latched onto this idea, as he has said in almost every single live stream or interview on the internet. Ashes of Creation is a PvX game. Okay, Steven, explain what that means. Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us on our first episode of the Ashen Insight Podcast, where we are going to be talking about all things Ashes of Creation and just generally having a good time chatting. For those who are not familiar, I am Zombie Medic.
I'm Ethan.
I'm Neo Ryan.
So Ethan and I are officers in a guild that Neo is the leader of called the Divine Order, and our guild has been around for a couple years with the sole intent of playing and becoming a prevalent community member within the Ashes of Creation community. All of us have supported the game for several years, and it's followed its development and are fostering a community of like-minded individuals within our guild. This series of videos we will be putting out has its purpose in engaging in meaningful conversation within the greater AOC community, as well as to share our thoughts and feelings as development continues, with the primary intent of making AOC the best game it possibly can be. And we all want the game to succeed and be great. If we didn't believe in it, we wouldn't have put as much money into it, and we wouldn't even be bothering to put out any of these videos in the first place. But not everything is as sunshine as rainbows as it may seem. There is a tiptoe-like mentality around certain topics within the community that we want to address fully and hopefully receive feedback on. I would love for nothing more than Steven to watch our videos and potentially even come on and talk with us, but ultimately these videos are for you guys, the viewers. And we are not only here to voice our opinions, but also to give a voice to those who may not otherwise have the ability to be heard. So, with that being said, that's kind of why today's topic is a heavy hitter of a topic. So, what do we think about PvX and what it means? And so we'll kick this conversation off with the history and experience within PvX games like New World, Mortal Online, and BDO. Like from my experience, games have tried to tout this PvX nomenclature a lot. Kind of been confused. There's been some confusion on what that exactly means and how it's affected the game's development and its progress. So let's start with Neo. Do you have any experiences with how this has worked in other video games?
When it comes to PvX, I think of two genres. I think of what we're used to on an MMO where you like Guild Wars 2 or ESO. You're gonna go do your content in the big open world, tackle what you want to tackle and do quest lines, blah 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 blah. And then there's the other side of the game where it offers it, which is PvP, battlegrounds, the open world PvP in that instance, in that area, in the region. What you never do is mash the two together. And that's for most theme park MMOs that we see nowadays, other than
because you
from Lineage and Mortal Online, things like that. And so when we go on the other end here, what I think of is what PvX is truly the pinnacle, the pinnacle of right now, without being the MMO, would be Conan Exiles, Lost Ark, or not Lost Ark, Jesus Christ, Ark, and Soul Mask. Really, I think you do a ton of PvE stuff. You're doing all of these PvE things. Maybe there's not a whole lot of quest, but even then you have objectives and stuff that you got to meet. That's always you don't pick up from people for the most part, but there are objectives that you got to reach. On top of that, taming, whether they be thralls, whether they be animals, whatever the case is, there's some kind of PvE thriving that needs to go on too. But all of the PvE is what ties you into your PvP. You're doing all that so you can build yourself up to PvP other opponents, raid other bases, things along those lines. It all stems though from the PvE aspect of things in building yourself up to get to that point and being competitive in PvPing. That's what I see. That's how I think of PvX when I hear it. Truly we haven't really seen what I guess a good version of what Ashes is attempting to do with the corruption system, keeping things in check and stuff like that, which I'm really waiting on a good iteration of the corruption system, because right now it just ain't it. But it's got some time to develop itself and get to where we need it to be, where we can see the blend of the two.
Sure. And Ethan, what do you think about PvX and different games that have been released?
I mean, every game has kind of defined their own and what PvX means to them. I think just in any stretch of the imagination, though, what it means in literal terms, even, is just player versus fill in the blank. I mean, you've got PvE, where you're fighting mobs and whatnot. You've got players that you're fighting, PvP. And with PvX, I like to think that you have gameplay that is tailored towards both of those. But then you also kind of have this hybrid of the two, where you have gameplay that is focused on the combination of them. So, games who do kind of give us those dungeons, those raids, the things that are complex, AI content, so to speak. And then it gives us, on the flip side, where you can do, arenas or just open world PvP, contesting points of interest, etc. And then somewhere along those lines, you kind of mesh the two, where you may have instances where there's a PvE point of interest, where you are going to kind of be at the hands of people who are maybe, on looking and maybe wanting to gank you to kind of take things for their own. Really, in a nutshell, I think PvX for most games just means that they are kind of laying the foundation for players to kind of entertain themselves with all aspects of the game.
Okay, yeah, fair. And I mean, from my perspective, I feel those, both of those viewpoints, and I think that's kind of the goal of PvX, is to sort of intermingle the two. But honestly, I just haven't seen a good example of that yet in either Ashes or in games in general, to be perfectly honest. And kind of one of the concerns that I have is, and I'm not trying to, shit on New World, but I just don't want to see AOC go down the path that New World went, where it started as a PvP sandbox-esque game, but then it became something else, and the player community, balked that there was no PvE, so they started adding in PvE as like a last-minute thing. Development cycle kind of, I feel, it got interrupted, and we got a game released to us that was unfinished and didn't feel good. And I'm not saying that, again, that New World is the worst game in the world, but it is not in a healthy spot, in my opinion, right now, as far as its player base. And I think that was partially the reason why. So with that being said, what were your beliefs about what this meant for Ashes when we were told by Steven numerous amounts of times, and I'll show some clips here a little bit later. But what was your preconceived notions coming into Ashes before you even touched the game about, okay, Steven says this is gonna be a PvX game. What did you think that meant for Ashes? How did you think it was going to go?
Yeah, so, firstly, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I don't like to paint any MMO, and especially Ashes, as the next WoW killer or insert your favorite MMO killer.
Yeah.
I like to think of it as what Steven has said it is going to be time and time again, which is the MMO that is going to be the most innovative within the last 20 years. And for me, whenever you throw in the word innovative and you throw in the word PvX, I immediately am thinking that across the board, you are just going to have the next best thing. So PvE content is going to be in the form of dynamic dungeons, dynamic raids that change based off of the progression, how fast you did it, how well you cleared it. Did you beat the boss in a specific manner? Does the boss react to that? Do they maybe even learn your behavior and respond to that? And then on the flip side, we don't just want a world where you can just walk down the street, attack somebody, take their loot, and that's the end of it. People want rewarding, fulfilling PvP. And so I want them to also kind of cater to that community. But because we are a PvX game, finding that way to mesh those two things together, I hoped that Ashes would offer us up instances in where we could PvE and or PvP, but that's an and or. Give us the opportunity to run into PvP at times, to not run into PvP at times. Give the opportunity for PvPers even to run into PvE. You may be chasing somebody out in the open world, and then you find yourself in an encampment of orcs or something of that nature. Put the perspective of the people that are in these different portions of the game, put them into other parts of the world that maybe they didn't initially get themselves into. Let there be a little bit of crossover there, but also make the content for each of those two divisions, so to speak, complex enough that if it's just any ordinary day where you're not going to be running into another player, or you're not going to be running into a random event, that piece of content is going to be complex, rewarding, and fulfilling within itself.
Ooh, yeah, that was interesting, man.
Yeah, that was good.
I mean, yeah, it's what we expect, though. You know what I mean? When we look at Ashes, we expect intricacies. It's going to be complex. The node system in itself it houses so many other systems just under its own umbrella of the node. That's kind of crux of everything when it comes to Ashes of Creation. It all starts from a node, truly. The player base is the ones that interact with it all, that build it up, that destroy it. But it's all there. It's all at the heart of nodes. So when I'm looking at Ashes and what my expectations / hopes are, I'm thinking of, nothing's going to be a true gank fest. And if it is, the punishing factors, not just from systems, because then that's just preventing PvP, I want the player base to be able to react in a certain way to prevent, that toxic environment that kind of bleeds into the games and then pushes people away from them, because it's like, I don't mind challenge, I don't mind competitiveness, I enjoy it all, from the both PvE and the PvP perspective. But when things start to just gank everything, overwhelming numbers death ball that, like we see in Guild Wars 2, is this truly dynamic? Is this actually going to be intricate gameplay? At that point, no. So what I'm hoping is to see the quotation perfect balance, or the closest that we can get in the genre at the moment, because right now there isn't. There is no there is no true corruption system that works. And even if there was something like that, there's usually a pay to win to kind of supersede all of that stuff.
Right.
So I'm looking for something that what Ashes is saying that they're going to provide a lot of intricacies and some fair gameplay. If you lack numbers where there's meant to be numbers, then hey, it is what it is. If you lack the skill where there's the need to have skill, then I want it to be, hey, it was a good fight, but we took the L, or hey, GG's, we took the dub, moving on. I just don't like the one-sidedness that the player base can get creative with and just start to exploit.
Okay. Fair. And I think that's a big thing to be said, is about mechanics that can be kind of overlooked in other games as they're either trivialized or just not as important as anything else. So like, yeah, they may be there, but they're not to the forefront of it, which I think is something that Ashes needs to, or Intrepid rather, needs to be mindful of. And from my perspective, I've obviously been a WoW player for a long time, 16, 17 years, and I've been doing a lot of high-end raiding in that time. So my thing is PvE. I like PvP. It's not a sole focus of mine. I don't mind doing it, especially in open world and even battlegrounds and things like that. But again, when I was told, from Intrepid in the studio that this is a PvX game, all the technology that they're implementing in this to make this something unique, I was prepared for something a little bit more akin to, like I said in the intro of this video, World of Warcraft, where you had PvP if you wanted to do it, you had PvE when you wanted to do it, and there was a combination of the two when you came into open world PvP. And I'm not saying that's the only way to do something. It's definitely not. But I kind of had that, I guess, expectation a little bit, whether that's incorrect or whatever. But I wanted that a nice mix and a nice balance. Like I said, in PvX, we still don't really know what it means. There's been really no definitive definition. It seems like kind of like a buzzword to just try to describe something that's new and different from all the other games out there. But I think that's what my expectation was this game to be a defining game for the PvX genre. Something that when you say, oh, this is a game that's a PvX game, we could say, oh, like Ashes of Creation type of thing, and and be able to correlate that with the subgenre of MMORPG, I guess. So with that being said, how is that, if at all, has your impression changed since pre-development into current, accessible game, I guess, or project alphas and things like that, where we can actually get hands-on and put into frame what they're telling us versus what we're actually seeing? And I'll just start this off with your point, Neo, about dynamic content. Dynamic content, from what Steven told us, or what we were told, is exactly what we thought it was going to be, like with what you and Ethan said, being that fights that change, fights that learn us at different times of the year, meaning something different happens, dynamic. But from what what Steven's been telling us is dynamic means we can just be attacked while we're doing this content. So what is y'all's takes? Where are you currently at with it?
It's So, in terms of the dynamicism there, it's what I'm expecting. What the goal is, at least from what we've seen, from what we've heard, and what we've been told, and what we can read on the wiki. We can see the direction they're wanting to go. We can read what it is that they're trying to do, but what we have played in both A1 and now A2, again, it's all testing. It's all testing. We get it. We understand it. It's just it's going to be an interesting way on how much this game is going to do, because at the moment, my opinion is Alpha 1 was insane. They had a lot more visually appealing things. I get it. They had the transition from Unreal 4 to 5. But I feel like we're missing a whole lot of everything.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
There's so many varieties of mobs that you would think would be around the region, but are not. Granted, we are working with just the Riverlands, so maybe they're sticking to, well, you're only going to see what you'll see in the river. And it's okay. They're keeping content, so for full release, we have a game to play and everything's not known. But it's with that limited knowledge, it starts to kind of weigh down a little bit without, reminding yourself of, man, okay, we're seeing weathers, but even then it's very bare bones. Everything in the game at the moment is very bare bones, and it puts a bleak outlook on things when you're playing this early. when it's just like, we don't have this, we don't have this, we don't have this, we don't have that. And then you try and compare it to, well, all the stuff we were theory crafting as a guild. I mean, it's gonna be maybe late next year until we supposedly these phases are gonna release some content with them, and expand the map a little bit more, which we could see in the lawless zones, and in up north west we saw the jungles going to start being prevalent, and in the southeast we saw that the desert's going to be a little bit more prevalent. So it's it's hopeful, but at the same time, I need to see the systems work right first. Right now, you can't caravan right. Right now, the node isn't truly opening up much when it comes to the region around it, very barely, and it's not doing a whole lot that we expected. And so, yeah, that's my point of view. Is we want to see more. We want to deal with more. Everything's going to be in the public's eye on Friday, so there's going to be a lot of harsh takes on some of this stuff. Granted, it is the alpha too. We all say it. We will say it again and again and again. But it's the new guys coming in are going to watch the big streamers, and hopefully the big streamers got their head on the swivel and are preaching what should be preached, which is, this isn't content, baby. This is a test.
Sure. And for anybody out there that doesn't know, we recently got the NDA lifted on the pre-alpha or the spot testing stuff, so we're able to talk about that a little bit, which is kind of the purpose for this video, is that we can share some of these thoughts and feelings. But with that being said, Ethan, what's your take on how your impression has changed pre and post?
Yeah, it's a little difficult to say to what degree it has or hasn't changed. I mean, I've backed this game now for the better part of 4 years, and up until current day, that has been under the information that I have received from live streams, community discussions, official forums, and things of that nature. Now there's a little bit of a turn being taken, I think, at the core impression that I do have of this game, just because alpha has opened up, as you said. NDA, at least verbally, has been lifted, and we're getting a little bit more of a first-hand idea of what the game is going to be offering. And Neo nailed it when he said this isn't a final version of a game. In fact, we are probably incredibly far away from a final version of this game. But nonetheless, the whole reason that the community is being opened up to these alphas is to see if there is at least a foundation being laid for some of the principles that we thought were going to make up this game. And from what I've seen so far, I do think that my impressions have changed some. Again, to what degree, I don't know, because I have, for the longest, put a lot of faith into Steven and all of the guys at Intrepid. But also, especially on the concept of PvE, I maybe do feel just a little bit, I don't know if let down is the word or not, but maybe just a little bit concerned. As I get into the alpha, I'm not seeing a lot of the things that I had hoped to see, in terms of that foundation for some of this PvE content. And I don't know if that complexity or that innovation that I spoke of earlier is going to be there just yet. And, that was a concern as I, got invited into the Alpha 2 spot test. But then we get these recent live streams recently, or videos, or just podcasts where Steven is coming on and he's maybe, giving us a further impression that maybe the things that we had originally thought of this game are not so. And so, as we continue to kind of break down the subject and talk about it, I don't know how I feel. It's really something that's actively ever changing up until the point that I'm concretely told that the game is not going to have this or the game is going to have this.
Exactly, and that's I don't think it could be put any better than that. As I'm sort of in the same boat where I don't know how I feel. I'll be honest. I'm a little bummed about kind of where we sit currently versus what we were told initially, and I know some of that is me and my own preconceived notions, putting those on a pedestal, thinking this is the way it should be. And we just have such limited information, even with the spot tests that are, obviously very bare bones and not going to have a lot of content that can definitely scale from there and achieve what, I want it to achieve. But yeah, I without having that concrete yes or no, it kind of puts us in an awkward spot, especially guilds like ours, where we are having, focuses on PvE and PvP. That's kind of what drives us, and I do want to see those things happen. I'm just, again, concerned that that's potentially not where we're headed, at least with the PvE content is how the PvE content is currently being shown to us. So that kind of segues into the next topic is this lack of information, this lack of clarity, not getting straight answers from Steven or Intrepid. And I mean, they obviously can tell us as much as they are able to tell us. I'm sure they want to spill the beans and tell us all the great things that they have, but I think part of that is probably because they don't fully have these ideas fleshed out yet, so they don't want to tell us things and then have to backtrack on them later when they either don't work out for a number of reasons, technology or manpower or, just whatever the case may be. But that's, to me, has been kind of a stickler or a sticking point is, and I have to, specify Steven here in his interviews and stuff that he's had, as Ethan mentioned, his evasiveness when it comes to certain answers, or questions rather. People are asking him questions and they're just not being answered. So before I get your guys' take kind of on the like I said, the lack of clarity and information that is being put out to us by Intrepid and Steven, I wanted to watch a quick video that comes from the Nice Gaming interview that he did with Steven like 3 days ago. And in this, I'll play the clip here, but in this clip, he's talking about how Intrepid and how Steven intends to garner the attention or the support of audiences from other games, such as World of Warcraft, ESO, Final Fantasy Online, that have a solid PvE experience. So we'll watch that video real quick and do a little react to it.
Creation has been presented as a PvX game or even an open world PvP MMO. How do you intend to satisfy those who love difficult in-game PvE content? Players coming from the hard mode trials of ESO, the ultimate raids of Final Fantasy 14, or World of Warcraft Mythic Plus dungeons and stuff like that.
I'm not, to be honest with you, I'm not sure that we're trying to compete with those games and the content that they provide in that arena, right? Because we're a different game. We're a PvX game, which means the types of challenges that PvE players can expect from us will oftentimes revolve around the additional component that players that you can't predict their actions provide the encounter design. So that's something that's systemically built in a PvX approach. Now, does that mean that we won't have repeatable content for PvE players to experience where PvP is not often a component of the design? Yeah, I believe that those things will exist. But can you say, hey, I want you to build it as good as Final Fantasy 14 or as good as World of Warcraft's? I don't think that's our goal. I don't think we're...
Okay, so let's react to that doozy of a statement. So... Again, this is the from what I've seen, the kind of stereotypical Steven answer. That's really kind of a non-answer or an evasive answer, because in at the crux of it, Nice is asking, how are you going to try to get this audience over here? Are you going to have PvE content? And he says, well, we're not trying to compete with those games. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, he didn't ask you how you were going to compete. He just asked you what kind of PvE content are you going to put in the game to, get the attention of PvE players. Doesn't mean that you need to have mythic dungeons. Doesn't mean that you need to have the ultimate and savage raids of Final Fantasy 14. It's just a question of, okay, what are you doing to kind of get these players sort of on board in your game? And again, he evades the answer by saying, well, we're not competing with them. Again, that's not the question. And he does go on to elaborate and say, again, what we've said before, that a lot of the challenge of these different encounters is going to be coming from unpredictable player actions, which, again, to me is PvP. So are you saying that the dynamic nature of PvE encounters in this game are going to be PvP? I think we've talked about this before, but a dynamic encounter to me is, a fight changing, not because other people are coming to gank you while you're doing it. It's because, a certain event has led things into motion that is going to cause this fight to be different this week than it's going to be next week. Or maybe the changing of the seasons or the day and night cycle, things that can change actual mechanics about the fight, the way the fight is fought, so to speak. Not just, other people are going to affect how you fight the boss. You know, to me that just it doesn't seem to track. And then saying that, you know, we may not have things in there as good as World of Warcraft or as good as ESO. To me, that seems like you're almost kicking yourself. Kicking yourself a little bit. Yeah, exactly. Like, what do you mean they're not going to be as good as other games? Like, are you intentionally going to not make them as good, or you just don't have the belief in yourself that you're able to make good content? Like, what does that exactly mean? So this is sort of where I'm getting at with the lack of clarity, the evasive responses, and just not answering questions. I don't know what you guys think about it, but
so the way I can see it, and like I'll even propose a bit of a solution here, is, you know, what we're gonna try and probably see here. It has a lot of variables, right? So in our eyes, you know, what we've got in our face here is Alpha 2. We've got the pre-testing that we've been doing for the past few weeks, and it's like, let's pretend, I don't know, Carfin, for instance, is being ran by a pretty big guild pretty consistently, and we want in. Well, maybe we don't have enough numbers, so does that mean, damn, well, we're out of the picture now? That's that. Well, I would like to see in some way, you know, that PvP isn't the dynamicism to a dungeon.
Right,
You know,
yeah.
you're expecting very high difficulty, quotation, in-game type stuff, but the only way to make it difficult is because there's PvP involved. That's a little bit of like that's not a good design philosophy, at least in my opinion. What I would like to see is, yes, we still have the engagement PvP being enabled within this dungeon, right? But what I would like is a little bit more of a maybe controlled environment of PvP within said dungeon. So every dungeon we jump into is going to have PvP enabled. That's, again, something we just can't escape, and that's the nature of the beast, right? But what I would like is, at certain areas within said dungeon, said open dungeon, whatever you want to call it, there is routes for PvP to where you're going to cross paths with another guild if somebody's running this shit with you guys. And so, if that's the case, y'all can just go on your merry way, or they can try and kill you for the loot that you've just been picking up. So that adds an interesting factor of, you know, maybe we go in there with our guys and we try and fill up as much as we can to this other area, or maybe these dungeons are so dynamic, so big and open world that one path to take is just going to take a guild's worth of people or a big raid group to go and do this one thing. Maybe this other thing has to meet so many other different criteria for it to be pursued, so that way when we go inside the guild, inside this dungeon or raid, whatever it's going to be, you're fighting, and if you want to fight, it's a risk. There's the risk of, if we die, we are losing all of this progress we pushed for. If we win, we're doubling down on what we've just done. And there goes the philosophy of it all, the risk versus compared to, we're running this dungeon and we've got ganked.
right. Yeah.
I think they can be so much more than that.
Is that going to be like the metric then to? Is that going to be like the metric then to? You know, how difficult something is? Is like, hey, we ran this dungeon. Oh yeah, but we ran this dungeon while getting ganked. Like, you know, is that the difficulty scaling? Yeah.
Who'd you get ganked by first?
Yeah. Right? Yeah.
Oh man, did you have people at the entrance to begin with, or not? It's gonna be so silly.
You know, I have quite a few thoughts on this, and I mean, I do want to preface it stepping away from the game for just a little bit and thinking of Steven, in the sense that he is going into the most important part of his game to date, and he is going in it without the assistance of one of his closest colleagues, Margaret, who's currently out on maternity leave. So I'm sure that stress on his shoulders is on an all-time high, and I understand that alone can be a large factor in kind of his presentation in some of these interviews where he's being asked these questions. But again, to kind of talk about the lack of clarity there. I mean, even whenever, you know, Nice is asking him what I would consider to be somewhat of a direct question, even though it is somewhat open-ended, he hits him with a kind of quote, "I'm not so sure we are trying." That's like it's kind of like a double negative almost. He's saying he's not even sure of what kind of they're doing in that moment, it feels like. Which isn't the Steven that I'm used to seeing on these live streams. He's always been very to the point, so much so that he actually says,
boom,
this is an in-game example. This is what we're going to be doing. you guys have a fear that we're not going to be giving this high competitive edge to PvEers. Guess what? We've got this. Boom. And
Exactly.
instead, he's
Yeah.
not only hitting us without that, he's not only hitting us with even a simple yes, he's hitting us with a kind of beating around the bush indefinitely, never getting to the punchline, unfortunately. And it is taking a little bit of an impact on kind of how I perceive the game, especially whenever this is a part of the game or the part of the launch, so to speak, where we are getting a first-hand, grasp on the game itself. The last 4 years I've been following the game has been all from those live streams. And as I'm getting into the game and I'm seeing firsthand that maybe I'm not seeing that foundation for what he's talked about for years, and then to further back that, he's not giving me that reassurance that I would normally look for, it is a little bit concerning to see.
Yeah, I feel bad I feel bad for those people that paid the $3,000 to the Phoenix Initiative Fund back in 2018, only to find out that this may not be the game that they thought it was going to be or that they wanted it to be. I think a lot of this could have, I don't want to say this problem could be solved, but in a way it could be just by having some definitive answers and information. I supported the game since 2018. I didn't put nearly that kind of money into it, and only until within the last couple of years did I decide to up my ante, because I thought this game was really something that I was wanting to play, and I have a lot of faith in it. But again, like Ethan said, these beating around the bush type answers, like why? It's almost telling in what he's not saying. So like, why couldn't he just say, yes, we are planning on having dungeons. Yes, we are planning on having end game raids and content for PvE, but maybe not at the level of the competitive nature of some of these other games with like the mythic dungeons and the mythic raids. Like how difficult would that have been an answer to say? But then the fact that he didn't say that kind of leads me to believe that maybe they're not planning on having even that. So like, and maybe that's just me overanalyzing it. I know we like to do a lot of theory crafting and talking about what ifs, and honestly, they mean nothing without concrete evidence and concrete information. But it still makes me a little concerned and skeptical.
This is one thing we gotta kind of hold to our analysis here and stuff like that. Is, this game is gonna be massive. It's gonna be huge. I forgot the map size on how big it's gonna be, but it's gonna be huge. So a lot of the time, some of the competition that we're talking about, some of the competitiveness and we're getting ganked during this dungeon, I don't think it's probably gonna be as prevalent as we make it out to be, I believe, or be, because right now we're playing on a slice of a biome, and even then we have 4 nodes. In comparison to all of those people are gonna be not in one jammed, cramped area with some little bit of content there. It's gonna be, let's zoom out for a bit. It's gonna be everywhere, all happening at once. There's 4 start locations along the map. So, the player base on how that's gonna work, who knows? It might feel a little bit of empty to begin with until we start getting adventurers traveling from across the other side of the map, or our neighbors all the way down the way are coming up north, and the only people we'll truly be competitive, competing with is going to be our neighbors, and so those will be the people we'll have to worry about in those kinds of things. So, it's a matter of racing to the finish line in terms of node progression and stuff like that. So, because that's a limit across the entire world. Yeah, when it comes to Metropoli.
Right.
But yeah, that's my take on that.
Yeah, that's a good point. We're seeing some of these kind of like ganking and the PvP and stuff like that because we're at least in the NDA or the spot testing, we're playing only in the Riverlands, which is a relatively small area. And when you think about the entire scale of the map, yeah, I think that's probably an accurate assessment that they're not going to be as prevalent or as common as they are at the moment. That could change, who knows? But so with that being said, unless anybody has anything else to add on that topic, I'm going to ask the question of, based on spot testing and NDA being lifted on, this kind of stuff, what does PvE look like in Ashes so far right now? And you touched on it a little, Neil, with the Alpha 1. But looking at that Alpha 1 gameplay, like, to me, that was awesome. Like, watching you go through the Underdark, or whatever they're calling it in Ashes, watching you guys do the different fights, the world bosses that you did. The dungeon felt and it looked like a dungeon. Even on the map that they had, you could see different dungeon locations across the map or in the world that was available to you in Alpha 1. And everything just looked like this is exactly what I'm looking for. And then we see kind of what we've been playing in the spot testing, which again, very bare bones, not a lot to it. It seemed like it was a completely different game. And kind of referencing back to the previous thing about clarity and details and things like that, I'm not going to get into the drama that's been going around the content creators lately, but one thing that has come out of that, which I think is a fair point, is through these live streams and these demos and stuff, they've been showing us what looks to be a completely different product from what they gave us for the pre-alpha 2 spot tests. And it kind of almost leaves a sour taste in my mouth, like saying, okay, this is what we're showing you guys. This is how good it looks and how good it can be, but we're not giving you that. Is that to come yet? Maybe that's we're going to see in Alpha 2. I sure hope so. But as far as what PvE looks like right now, it ain't it. Like, it's mob grinding, to be perfectly frank. And for those people that don't know, we're able to talk about it. We just can't show any videos and audios and pictures and things like that. But essentially, you have these POIs across the world. You've got, for example, Ruins of Cephalion, Oakenbane Keep, Ursine Caves, the Citadel of the Steel Bloom. All these are locations across the map that are open world. They're not instance, but they usually house elite mobs, 1, 2, or 3 star elite mobs of varying levels, and occasionally elite named mobs as well, where you can go there and you can farm them for XP, or you can kill the named mobs and they're going to drop one of 3 things: a recipe, a rare ingredient for that recipe, or the actual item that the recipe would make itself. So it kind of gives people a targeted approach to farming specific pieces of gear. But what we're being told is in the Alpha 2 with this Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3, we're getting 4 pocket dungeons in Phase 1. We're getting 1 grand dungeon in Phase 1. None of these mention a raid between Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3. Nothing, no raids, nothing. So what we're kind of left to deduce is what we're seeing kind of right now in Alpha 2 in the spot testing is very similar, if not what we're going to be seeing in the Alpha 2 itself. And so, like, Ursine Caves, Oakenbane Keep, are those being considered pocket dungeons? If that's the case, then that's not PvE in my opinion. Like, yes, you're killing mobs, you're not killing players, so technically speaking, yes, it's PvE. But to me, it's BDO. It's grinding mobs for drops for hours on end. Like, that's what we did before the quest system was fixed. To the point where, the best way to gain levels and XP and gear is just to go out and find a bunch of mobs that spawn relatively quick, that are high level and give a lot of XP, and grind the shit out of those for levels and gear. And to me, again, that's not PvE. Like, yes, it's fighting monsters, but it's not true PvE content. If that's what they're referring to as far as these pocket dungeons and the grand dungeon, I'm guessing they're talking about Carfin. Not 100% sure, but I think that's what they're talking about. Carfin's the exact same way, but just on a larger scale. And I could devolve into like what PvE is, in my opinion, and obviously everybody's going to have their own different opinion. But where are you guys on the whole? What PvE looks like in Ashes right now?
So every player is a little bit different, but me personally, I play MMOs for the prestige aspect. I like to show off what I've done, what I've gained, etc. And so I want to paint a picture that for everybody out there who's played one of the traditional MMOs, you understand is, you're looking for an upgrade to a gear, potentially even your best in slot gear, and it is likely to drop from a boss or a mob of some sorts that is within a dungeon. And it's about the progression of even getting to that boss that is a part of that prestige. So, we go into a dungeon, there are mobs, you work your way through, there's some progression, there's anticipation that is building, there's a boss here that you fight, move on to the next who has, increasingly more difficult mechanics, so on and so forth, until you get to a lair, for example, where this beast of a boss pops up, and it's the guy you've been looking for that has a chance of dropping this sweet chest plate. And you finally kill this boss, you hit that drop rate, and there's that item. Here is why what I've seen so far for the foundation of Ashes' A2 has been a little bit concerning. Highwayman Hills, for example. It's essentially a little bit of a valley between 3 different mountains. It's essentially just a bandit encampment of varying bandits with a few, like Zombie said, elite named mobs. going into the Highwayman Hills, if I was to ask anybody, even the devs, I don't know if they could give me a solid answer whenever I was to ask, where do I start? Where do I end? And I would be okay if they even gave me a few places that I could start and a few places that I can end, because that would give me an indication that these dungeons or this piece of PvE content is dynamic. But to be completely honest with you, and I don't believe that it is from breaking bugs or anything of that nature, you can simply just walk around the encampment to the far side where an elite might spawn and start your dungeon as it may come across with that named elite mob. There is no progression. There's no build up. There's no anticipation. And whenever you do fight that boss, it doesn't feel rewarding to fight him. And whenever he drops that piece of loot, it certainly doesn't have that prestige to it that I'm looking for. So it's a little bit concerning whenever I see things like that. I do think that there's a little bit of a silver lining in the Ashes, current version of the game. Stillbloom Citadel is a pretty good example, and it also is a pretty good layout of how I would personally like to see PvX come together with both PvE and PvP aspects. Is you essentially have this large arena of knights, and there's only two entrances to the whole thing. You have a north side and a south side, and you don't have to go out the same side that you went in, but you do have to go through one of those sides. And by having it have some sort of linear progression, but more options to where you're not just one group going into the same doorway, that leads us into this progression. It does build up that anticipation for when you do actually get to the Stillbloom Citadel Knights elites. But it also, because there is another entrance on the opposite side, as two groups that may be tackling that content work towards the middle, towards the higher complex, fights, you do have a higher chance of meeting that group. And that's where I want to see PvX in this game. I don't want it to be a forced group of 20 guys sitting at the gates to a raid waiting to gank me once we get to the final boss. I want it to be something that's natural, in the sense that we have two groups of guys who are fighting over the same thing, not one group of guys who's looking to fight this piece of content and another who's looking to just simply gank them because they can. I want it to have somewhat of a natural feel to it, and I think that the Stillbloom Citadel does a pretty good job of that. But as far as the rest of the points of interest go, which, to put it into perspective, if I had to guess, I'd say we probably had, what do you guys think, maybe 15 points of interest throughout the entire Alpha 2?
Yeah.
I think that's probably the only place that really gives me some of that promises, that hope that Steven and the devs have promised us. And I feel like if people are getting into the Alpha 2 and they potentially agree with those ideologies, I think that as a community, us voicing those concerns during a testing time, if the devs are the devs that we hope them to be, then potentially they will listen to that feedback and we'll get a little bit more of that in the game.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. What I'm looking to, what was the question? Let's get that question.
What does PvE look like in Ashes right now, from what we've been able to see from the spot testing?
So PvE in Ashes right now, it's it's Alpha 2 for sure. There ain't no doubt in my mind. If I were to, they'd be a little skeptical on mostly the mobs, but the gameplay that we're using, the fighting style, the abilities, this, that, and the other that we're playing with via our own characters, that's pretty freaking good. That's good. I enjoy it. I had my to start. Tank was just using stamina for every little thing.
Oh yeah.
Time tanking, it was hard, it was difficult. And then now we're at the state where, hell, I can tank. All I got to worry about is threat management, as what a tank should be worrying about. So, just having that right there and then is okay. We're seeing progress. We're seeing good stuff. But the mob fighting, the PvE, the stuff that we think of when we see PvE, you think of any other game and you hear PvE. Oh, cool. Let me see what the combat looks like. How are these mobs interacting with them? Is everything just a cheese fest where you just jump on something and then kill it from there where it can't attack you?
Right.
Or are these fights, are they going to pull you down and beat you to a pulp because, you're trying to hide or whatever the case is? There's some stuff like that I wish I would be able to see in here, but I will have to say, because it's in the Alpha 2, there's just some stuff we're not going to be able to see. What I'm hoping for going forward is it's a dynamicism. I probably mentioned this earlier, maybe not, but with the nodes are the they're the beating heart of Ashes of Creation when it comes to content. Really, some content's never going to be touched until a node around that region is. So there's going to be so much things that we haven't tackled, haven't touched, haven't looked at, haven't been able to dive into when it comes to lore and all sorts of other things, items and whatever. Well, if the nodes are going to be dynamic and such and opening up these areas and things like that, I hope it's just not opening a door to a gated area that was just gated off, but it's just a graveyard. Oh, there's nothing crazy about a graveyard. I'm just now fighting zombies. It didn't change much. It's like, oh, open the area I'm looking for. Holy crap, this rock pile has now caved in on itself, and this is an entrance now into the Underdark. I get into the Underdark, fighting seen before. I'm gathering mats that were not gatherable before. I'm doing X, Y, and Z that I wasn't able to do. That pushes me, my guild, and all the citizens of said node to progress the node further so we can explore our region that much more extensively.
Mm-hmm.
It gives the adventure back to adventuring in an MMORPG. There was some debate about, there's not enough of the role-playing in a role-playing game. Well, I'm not looking to do what people consider RP. I'm not about that. But for those who enjoy it, cool. What I want to have fun in the game. And so if I'm presented all of these options because everyone's commitment to it as a vast majority is contributing to something and opening up different things, and everyone's getting kind of a piece of that cake of these are the fruits of our labor here. New content. Content is always king. The combat's already down, but if the mob's just gonna sit there and look at me and do a thing or two, or just teleport to me when I'm looking at it, and like when is it gonna aggro, and then it's in my face. It's some of the kinks they got.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that I'm trying to run away from a wolf. Everyone knows this.
Oh my god.
You don't run away from wolves. You
No.
fight the wolves.
Yep.
Because if you're running
God
away,
damn.
you're dead.
Dude, the wolves are a meme. So while Neo's talking here, I'm kind of thinking about it now, and I want to ask you guys a little bit of a question here. It seems like just what I'm hearing between the three of us that our primary concerns, at least in the current iteration of A2's PvE, is more so the structure and the layout of the world and those actual dungeons or overworld mobs, whatever you want to refer to them as. But take that part of the pie aside, and I do know that's a large chunk of the pie, but certainly not all of it. What do you guys think in terms of the classes, the literal combat itself, and just the general synergy between the classes that we currently have?
I think it's in a great spot, personally. I think, I'm a cleric main. I play cleric. It feels good. Comboing a cleric with a bard just feels perfect. Like, they synergize together so well, and there's a lot of different buffs and things that other classes offer that seem like everything flows very, very well. I think that's the thing I'm most impressed about and is most promising to me is the way the classes feel, and the combat. I think they did an excellent job so far, and I can only go up from here.
On the money. I think it's been great, man. What do you think, Neil?
Same. Dude, same. Again, I had my issues with tank. I was
Threat issues aside.
bitching up a store. Yeah, okay, hold on. But no, it was having a hard time at the beginning there with blocking. I put my shield up. It was consuming 20% of my stamina already. I'm like, golly, just to lift my shield, like that's a bit tough.
Sheesh.
And then getting hit, that's gonna take a chunk off of stamina. So I'm like, okay, well I'm not gonna regen stamina because I have my shield up.
Having to move.
And then I'm moving with my shield up because I want to get out of an AoE. Well, good luck. You're using stamina. So I was going through hell. I was bitching up a storm, but they fixed it. That isn't the case anymore. Now it's just worry about threat management, and the competition for threat management is the cleric.
Yeah.
I've got to compete against them into getting the aggro on myself. But that's that. The guys who aren't meant to be doing damage aren't dealing damage. Granted, there is a pretty OP cleric build at the moment that can solo anybody, but for group content's sake, everyone does their role to a T. It is phenomenal. It is really great. It's working as it should, I think. And the good thing is it can only get better. So
Exactly.
I'm excited for that.
I think it's almost heartbreaking a little bit, in my opinion, that the combat and the classes feel so good, and group synergy feels so good, not to be able to apply that to something like a dungeon or a raid, to mob grinding.
Yep,
Like I said, it's a little heartbreaking, but I have high hopes.
Yeah.
So
Sipping on the
move
hope
on
here.
to the last portion here, real quick. What do you guys think is the point of the game as it stands right now? What are we trying to achieve as a player? Granted, yes, there's only very limited information and bare bones mechanics in the game right now, or in the alphas right now. But what do you think the point is? You know, the ultimate end game for me, in my opinion, is of PvX is to achieve a balance between PvP and PvE. So right now, with the way it stands, having very little PvE content, it almost feels like we are grinding mobs, we are crafting gear, for the sole purpose of using that against other players. Typically in MMOs, and I'm not saying that, you know, they can't break the mold, because I'd be more than happy for them to do so as long as it's done in a good way. But usually the progression or the game loop is, you know, level up, grind for gear, use that gear to fight higher level challenges, and then obviously PvP along the way. But right now it doesn't really feel like that's the case, because there is no really high level challenge for us to put this gear that we're working towards against. It seems like we're grinding these things, building our characters just to fight other people. So what are y'all's take on that?
Ethan, I'll let you go first on this one, man.
Yeah, man. So, you know, I think Neo's kind of said it pretty well in conversations that we've had before. But you know, even Steven said it himself. You know, PvE was originally made or meant to at least be the start of the game. It's kind of the construction phase of all these nodes that are going to be influencing the world around us. And then later you have the PvP that comes in, that is kind of a destruction in the world, that kind of keeps things, you know, ever, you know, knocking it down so that it can rebuild itself, whether in the node that it was in previously or in another node. I think what you said, Zombie, was pretty spot on. I mean, you just want to hope that there's going to be a balance for this game. You know, you don't want any aspect of the game between both PvE and PvP to outdo the other. You know, I hope that as we get towards end game and we start seeing these metropoli, we've been calling them, kind of come to fruition, I hope that it doesn't just end there. You know, that the prestige stops once you get to a metropolis. You know, I'm hopeful that it's impactful enough and dynamic enough upon the world that it too brings on its own dungeons and raids. It too brings on its own points of interest that maybe PvPers are going to find interest in. I want the game to have a good cycle at the end. You know, we touched on games very early on, such as New World and the likes, where that game was good for the first 20 hours. And then you get
True.
to the end and you realize that loop only goes so far.
Mhm.
And even though that has great aspects to the game, you can't find yourself investing any more time in it. And, you know, the point of this game for me is to be a no life. And when I log on for the day and you guys see Ethan online, you know where I'm going. You know where I'm going to be investing my time. And what I want here is a game that is worth investing into. So I hope that as we get further into progression and as we start giving feedback as a community, you know, about Alpha 2, we kind of stick to that balance. You know, I know there's going to be people in the community that hear this. I've already seen it in comment sections on other videos, that people that are on this side of the argument just don't want to be PvP'd. And I don't want to paint that picture at all, because while I do think that PvP doesn't need to be in all aspects of the game, I would be heartbroken if it wasn't in some. You know, there is going to be a place where you should only PvE. There should be a place where you should only PvP. And there should be several instances where you can do both. And if this game can find a good way to synergize those two without completely punishing people at every corner that they turn, I think it's going to have huge success and it's going to have tremendous longevity.
100%. Well said.
The way I'll tackle this is, what's the point of the game? And I'll say right now, the game we're in testing, so truly to test. But you know, like that for a second. Let's look at this for a different angle for a minute. You know, what is the point of this game? Right now, it's all right, guys. We've gotten into line hold. It's time to go and grind up one of the nodes. You know, we're gonna get this node up. Once the node's up, perfect. We got to keep getting it up, and the further it goes, the more options with Hits Village that are available to the players to then spread out and start doing other things. So when you're doing that, you're grinding, You gotta grind to get the node up. That's truly it. You can't quest. What quest are there to do? The freaking board quest that you can get at Lionhold or whenever the node hits level 1, since it's a what is it? Whatever the first stage is.
Encampment or wilderness, yeah.
Wilderness, there you go, wilderness, and then you get to the encampment, you get to the board up there, and you can do all that stuff. But I mean, it becomes pretty monotonous really quickly. And so it's just, there's a lack of content. It is what it is. But that you grind the gear, and so once you get your node up, and people are occasionally building the buildings up, whatever. But you need gear. You're gonna craft it? Nope, that's a pretty much waste of time at the moment. Right now, it's get to 20 and then craft the gear from there, because there's a big gap from level 10 to 20. So maybe you could do some crafting in between. Why would you do that? You can just get the drops from grinding to get to 20. So it's it starts to become an overlooking the crafting system in a whole, gathering, the processing, all that stuff. Unless you want the full set bonus that you can get from having the full set on. But right now it's just grind, grind. I mean, it's MMOs in a nutshell, but it doesn't really diversify it much.
Right.
And so, if you want to do true quests, some of the hidden quests that are out there in the world and stuff like that, well, you get no real benefit. Right now, it's just do it for fun. That's your pure PvE environment right there. It's just, I'm gonna go do a quest. It's kind of whack. I'll be honest.
It is weird.
In the PvP, right now, the way the PvP is situated is you're PvPing for a contested area to protect yourself from ganking, or if there's a node war. Attacking a caravan, it's pretty rough right now. It's not really viable. So, it's a weird stage that we're in at the moment compared to the grand scheme of things. I truly was hoping that the grind a mob situation wasn't going to be the case, and that completing the quests, because I'm pretty sure that's what we've been told, that would be the most efficient way. Right now, that is nowhere near the truth. It is just grind mobs, grab loot, continue, and you just turn your brain off for a second, and so you start feeling like you're about to AFK Ashes, and it's not a good look at the moment. But with some of the hidden quests that I'm over here doing for fun and just to discover and see what the loot looks like, and those are really interesting. I'm having a good time doing those. I just wish there was more of a benefit. I'm granted I'm playing the game for whatever reasons, but having fun should be one of them. And
Right.
if I'm having some fun doing questing, and I'm getting the levels out of it, well, I want to have more fun. I want to get more XP. You match the two together, and it's just because I think it's a small area. We're not seeing a whole lot of that, but it's that's what we're sitting at. That's what I think at the moment.
Sure. Cool. Well, I want to touch on two more very quick things. One video I forgot to mention in the PvE section that I want to just have us take a quick look at, just because it highlights everything that we've been talking about. And now this is an interview that Vladis did with Steven, and he asked him the question point blank, and we'll watch it and we'll see his response. But shout out to Vladis here, cool dude. He helped me set up this OBS for doing our first podcast. Though, if you're watching, Vladis, thank you very much, buddy. Appreciate it. But let's go ahead and switch over to this, and we'll take a quick look at it here.
And the death penalty debuff.
So why do you hate PvEers?
I don't-
Like, why do you have to make it so hard for PvEers? Like, I mean, I coming from a stance of a PvEer myself. I've dabbled in PvP and other MMOs. Like,
Sure.
is it because you want the feeling of PvE to actually have, like, you want it to matter? Because again,
let me ask this question. In what way do you feel that PvEers are hated?
there's more things for PvPers to do than PvE.
In what way?
Well, there's like for dungeons, like there's like instance content, right? We don't know if those instance contents can be repeatable, right? There's not instance.
Some of those instance content are PvP as well. Some are PvE, right?
Okay.
That's the intent behind the system. There's going to be an equitable divide because we're PvX, right?
Right.
But is it because?
Okay, so that in and of itself. Oh, hold on. So that in and of itself is, again, what we've been talking about. I don't think Vladis has played the the spot testing, he might have. I thought I saw in a video before that. Has he? Okay, so he has.
Yeah.
So I think he's spot on here. 100%. There's more for PvPers to do at the moment than there is for PvE. And again, Steven kind of being evasive and not answering the question directly. And by saying, again, that this as a PvX game, again, what does that mean? And that some of the challenge that comes with PvE content is in the form of being able to PvP while you're doing PvE content. So, again, I just wanted to shout out Vladis there and kind of talk about that again in a little bit more depth. I should have gone in the PvE questions section, but worth pointing out, and I hope that this spurns some actual concrete answers from Steven and Intrepid. One last thing here that I'm going to mention is, also should have mentioned it in the PvE section, but this is more of a personal request to Intrepid and Steven. Please, for the love of God, change the way XP works in groups. Please. Right now, the way it works is the more people you have in a group, the less XP you get per mob that you kill. Sort of de-incentivizing people to group up, to play with each other, as well as making efficiency more of a priority than playing with other people. Like in other games, WoW, for example, you're in a group with people, you earn more XP. It's a group XP bonus that you get, incentivizing you to group up and play with other people. Whereas in Ashes, if you kill a mob that's level 5 as a solo player, you get 1,000 XP. If you do it with 2 people, you only get 800 XP. So it creates this culture of having as small of a group size as possible for maximum XP gain while still being able to clear things quickly. So I hope that's something that changes, something that we've seen in the NDA, no longer NDA tests, but I pray that they change this for the overall health of the game. But with that being said, we're going to wrap up our first episode of the Ashen Insight Podcast. If there are any requests for topics that you guys have, throw them in the comments down below. I'd be more than happy of throwing them in for future videos. We've got other videos planned here coming out, but we wanted to make sure we got this video out with the newly unclassified information for the spot testing. So yeah, thanks again everybody for watching. I hope you all enjoyed and look forward to the next one. We'll see you later.
See you guys.